Welcome to our YouTube video series on employment law, focusing on employee terminations. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal, and in this particular YouTube video, we're going to be talking about the absolute and utter mess that Alberta payroll has become. Now, you really need to be dealing with this if you get fired, you're terminated, or you quit your job, because then, and really only then, do you have an opportunity to challenge and to look into the situation with respect to your company's payroll and how they paid you. And the reason you want to be looking into this is because Alberta's payroll system, the laws created by the Employment Standards Code, are quite complicated. Let me take this back. They are complex. And nobody seems to have the intuition or aspiration to properly address them. There's probably some companies out there that are doing stuff correctly. But unfortunately, there's far too many companies, in my professional estimation, that is simply not taking the time to really look into how Alberta's Employment Standards Code works and how it applies to their payroll systems. Because it's not a simple process. And unfortunately, too many Alberta companies, and this includes some very large companies, simply defer to payroll software. And as we've talked about before, the problem with payroll software is it was largely developed elsewhere and then gets pushed into Canada and then gets pushed out of Ontario into Alberta. So you already have this migration of software, which might well be applicable for the state in the United States where it was created, and might even have some application with Ontario, which has a very different Employment Standards Code. It's actually an Employment Standards Act, and a different payroll regime. And if you're simply dropping Ontario's payroll regime into Alberta, you have a very serious problem, because you're not in Ontario, you're in Alberta. And that's the crux of the matter, because Alberta is a complicated province when it comes to payroll. And unfortunately, whether it's the payroll professionals or the legal professionals who are working on this stuff, they're not putting adequate time into making sure that the payroll systems in Alberta are compliant with the law. And that's a very, very serious problem, especially when it comes to you as an employee being paid properly. And naturally, the challenge is, can you address this while you're employed? And the problem with trying to address this is all of a sudden, you're not causing a problem just for yourself and an issue for yourself. You're causing a company-wide issue. So unfortunately, most people will need to suck up and bear it. Keep records, because this is something you should be doing. Keeping pay statements off of the company server. You got to transpose them. And then dealing it when you get terminated from the job. You're dismissed, you're laid off, you're fired, or you simply get released, or you depart and you quit. Because at that point, or slightly before that point, that's when you should be dealing with it. And in truth, you should be addressing it with knowledgeable legal counsel right after you review this YouTube video and start putting stuff in place for the future. But when you leave the job, that is when you have to make a serious point to get the right lawyer involved and to really ascertain whether or not you were fully paid during the course of your employment. Because what I'm telling you, and I'm not just spouting nonsense, but I'm actually talking from actual discernible facts and realities, and this relates to large companies, medium companies, that spend apparently lots of money on payroll staff, lots of money on HR and accountants and lawyers, yet still fail to address the discrepancies that are found in Alberta's Employment Standards Code as compared to other provinces, other countries, as to how they pay their employees, such that they are effectively underpaying their employees for years and years and years. And especially with the way Alberta's economy is structured and the pay structures that so many employees are operating under, the significance of this can be great. We're not talking about hundreds of dollars. We're talking about thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars that are being underpaid to individual Alberta employees because the payroll system is so messed up, because the pay statements are so messed up, and because they aren't following the law of the land. And it's the law of the land is actually quite clear. The challenge is to do the computations right, to do them correctly, and then for the employers who haven't apparently been challenged all too much, and this is what's surprising to myself, is that they haven't been properly challenged, because if they had been challenged, like we're doing right now, but if they've been challenged in the past, these issues should have been cleared up. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of these situations where the issues have not been properly tackled, the law has not been specifically followed, and employees are being underpaid. And it's a travesty of the greatest degree, because it's money that's been earned by you as an employee, working hard and often putting lots of time, overtime, working on certain holidays, and not being paid appropriately. And that's a violation of the law, because the law is quite clear. The computational methodology is quite specific, but it's simply being failed to address. The math is not there. And that's probably because these companies have become so big, and the divisions, even between the labor forces, is somewhat distinct, in the sense that mathematicians are separated from argumentative people. The lawyers know certain things, the accountants know other things, the payroll people know other things, but nobody sits down and gets together and collaborates and figures out what is actually due. And there's another problem to this whole thing, is that employers are not specifically looking to see how they're underpaying their employees. They're not looking to see how they can correctly pay everybody. And in fact, most employers are simply thinking, we pay way too much in labor. We're not going to go look to find out how we could pay them more. And that's a problem in Alberta. They feel like they're overpaying their employees as it is. And in so doing, they overlook fundamental obligations required by law in our professional estimation. So if you find yourself losing your job, quitting your job, being fired, terminated, or otherwise, and now it's time to see what your former employer owes you, what your former boss has due to yourself, don't simply limit yourself to termination and severance pay. Don't simply spend a few minutes looking at a pay statement which looks very professionally done from one of these big companies, whether it's ADP, Ceridian, or otherwise. You got to start delving into what has actually happened. You got to talk with knowledgeable legal counsel and see if there's something more. And unfortunately, for some strange reason, Employment lawyers haven't taken this up previously in Alberta to the degree that they should have. At least that's how I foresee it. That's something that I'm trying to change. That's something I'm trying to deal with right now, is the fact that it's not just about the termination of severance pay. It actually goes beyond that. Payroll is actually messed up in Alberta. And unless you actually look at it and you get somebody to clearly show you it, you might not discern it. It's not the most straightforward thing until you actually review it with the right person. And that's what I try to do. Try to break it down, try to articulate it correctly, using the pay statements that you have. Analyze the payroll that was undertaken, undertake the pay that was due to yourself, and discern whether or not you are underpaid. And we're talking about underpayments from a legal standpoint. Underpayments from a statutory standpoint, where it is technically against the law to have calculated it anything less, because there are set requirements prescribed by the Alberta Employment Standards Code that Alberta employees are required to be paid. And unfortunately, for some particular reason, there's a number of competing rationales I see out there, Alberta employees are not getting their full pay. And that's unfortunate and something that you should not be allowing to happen to yourself, especially at the time that you'll lose your job. You need to get on it. You need to collect the money that was otherwise due to yourself, because that money is rightfully your entitlement. And you can't simply stand by and allow your former employer to walk away with what was properly your money, especially if you've earned it and it's due to yourself legally. You need to fight for it. So if this is something that you feel you want to look into, please feel free to contact yourselves, because you should not be walking away without the money that you have earned by law. It is illegally your money, and you need to know that it is yours and why it is yours. So that's what we're working on these days, and that's what we can work with you on. Thank you.